Hello guys, welcome back to another video of our Node.js series. In our last video we talked about the Node.js REPL, and in this video we're going to focus on something very important, the Node.js modules. We're going to look at the CommonJS and also going to look at the ES modules. So when we talk about modules in Node.js, what do we mean? Modules allows you to break your application into smaller and reusable pieces of code. Of course, making your programming easy to manage, easy to scale, and easy to understand. So we're going to break down what module is in basic terms. In simple terms, a module in Node.js is just a file containing JavaScript code. A module can export a function, a module can export an object, a module can export a variable. You can also import a module to another file, but before you do that, you must have the module exported from another file. This helps you to organize your code into manageable chunks. So we made mention of something called CommonJS. So we're going to look at the CommonJS modules. First, let's talk about the default module system in Node.js, which is of course the CommonJS we're talking about. CommonJS modules have been around since the beginning of Node.js. In CommonJS, we use what we call the module.export to export things. So what do I mean? Let's go back to our code editor. I'll open up my app.js and I'm going to show us how modules were exported or are being exported in CommonJS. In CommonJS, if you have a function called login, to export this function in CommonJS, you do module.exports and you say equal to login. This is how to export in CommonJS. Use the module.export to export things, and if you want to import this module in a different file, use the require keyword. What does the require keyword look like? You say require and you pass in the module name you want to require. I mean the link to the file you want to import. So we're going to see how to demonstrate this in real application. But before we do that, we're going to look at the example of the CommonJS. We're going to create a file, we're going to create a module, export it, and see how to import it in a different file. So first, I'm going to create a file. I'm going to call it maths.js. So inside my math.js, I'm just going to have two variables returning two values. I'm going to say const add equal to a and b, which will just return a plus b, right? I'm going to have the other, say const subtract should be equal to a and b, which is just going to return a minus b. So I have these two variables. So remember we said modules can export a function, module can export an object, module can also export a variable. So how do I export these modules? I'm going to say module.export equal to, I'm going to pass in the add and the subtract here. So this is how to export modules in CommonJS. So what's the next thing to do? I have to go and import this module in my app.js. So I'm just going to say from here, I'm taking out all we have before. I'm just going to say const math equal to require. What am I requiring? I'm requiring the math function we exported, and it is in a math file, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is just to say console.log math.add. Math.add is going to take two variables, two arguments rather. I'm going to say 5 and 7. So if I save this, I can still do console.log math.subtract. Now I'm going to pass in 10 and 5. So this is how to use the import keyword to import module to your new file. From what we have here, the module.export, which we have in our math.js, is what allows us to make the add and subtract function available to the app.js, like I explained. And the require keyword here is what imports the module, so we can use the function in our app.js just like we are using. So the next thing we're going to do is to start up this app and test out what we have. So I'm going to open up my terminal and I'm going to run this application. I'm going to say node app.js and I'll hit enter. From what you can see here, you see the two functions ran. The first function is the add, so 5 plus 7 is 12, and the second function is subtract. 10 minus 5 is 12, is 5. So this is how to use the import, this is how to export and import modules in CommonJS. So next we're going to look at the ES modules. So before we proceed, I want to remind us that Node.js also supports ES module like I explained earlier. It is the modern standard for modules in JavaScript apps are today. ES modules are used in the browser as well as in Node.js. So you can run it in the browser, you can run it in your Node.js. So when we say browser, if you're using frameworks like React, you can use the ES module to do your module import and export. So here, instead of using the require keyword, just like we used in our CommonJS, we use the import keyword to bring in modules to our files. And instead of using module.export to export modules in our application, just like we do in the CommonJS, we use the export keyword alone to expose functions or objects or variables to wherever it is required. But take note, before you can use the ES module in your node, you need to make some modifications in your package.json. So here is our package.json. The first modification I'm going to do, I'm going to add the type property. I'm going to say type, and I'm going to give it as module. The type is going to be module. By default, your type is CommonJS, but we are changing to module. If you don't do this, you're going to run into a very big problem, a very big error. Now let's go back to our math.js and let's rewrite what we already have. So here, instead of having module.export, all I'm going to do is say export const add, and I'm still going to say export const subtract. Nothing has changed, it's just the export method that changed. So I'm going back to the app.js and I'm going to change the method of import, right? I'm going to change the method of import. I'm just going to say import add subtract from maths. So this is how to import in ES module. But look at this. This is going to affect the way we are calling the function here. So instead of saying math.add, we can just have access to the math itself. And instead of doing that, we can have access to subtract. So we have subtract, and this is going to be add, right? This should be correct. Add, double D. So if we save this and we still do the same thing, say node app.js, and I hit enter, we get an error. Cannot find module app maths imported. So this is going to be maths.js. Please correct this. If you face this error, add.js, add the extension to it. So if you clear this and I do again node app.js, you get the result, the same result we got in our from the beginning. So look at this, pay attention to this. If I eventually take out this type, right, and or maybe you mistakenly skipped this part and we go back to run this app, you're going to face an error. Here is the error, say to load an ES module, set type equal to module in the package.json, or use the .mjs extension, right? Use the .mjs extension. So if you want to use the ES module, your extension is going to be mjs, but if you're using the CommonJS, you can use the .js. But if you're using the .js extension and you want to use the ES module, you have to specify the type in your package.json, right? If we go back there and try to run again, you see that we have the results. Now let's look at the differences between the CommonJS and ES module. By now we should spot out some difference by ourselves if you're following the examples. One, we're looking at the differences in the importing method. In CommonJS, we use the require keyword, but in the ES module, we use the import keyword, right? Just like we explained. Secondly, in the exporting method, in CommonJS, we use the export module.export, but in the ES module, we use the export keyword alone, right? Thirdly, we look at the file extension, just like I explained earlier. In CommonJS, we use the .js extension, just like we have the app.js, math.js, and so on. But in the ES module, we must work with .mjs. But in a case where you want to use the .js, that is where you have to specify the type equal to module in your package.json, just like we explained. And fourthly, we have the dynamic import. ES module allows dynamic imports, meaning you can import modules at runtime using just the import keyword. Finally, we'll talk about the synchronous versus asynchronous method. CommonJS modules are loaded synchronously, which means this module will wait for this module to load before it can continue. But of course, in the ES module, modules are loaded asynchronously, which can improve performance, as you know, for especially large applications and applications that require to be fast, right? And now we'll proceed to when to use the CommonJS and when not to use the CommonJS. CommonJS, please take this from me. Both CommonJS and ES modules have their use cases. They have their pros and they have their cons. So we're looking at the CommonJS. CommonJS is still the most widely used module system in Node.js, no doubt, especially for legacy projects. But if you look at the ES module, it is the future and will be the preferred choice for modern JavaScript development, especially for projects that need to run both on the browser and on Node.js. Remember, I said the ES module runs both in the browser and in Node.js. So if you're starting a new project and if you're following this series, I would recommend using ES module because we're going to use ES module throughout this series. However, if you're working on an existing project, you would like to continue using CommonJS, there is no problem with that. And finally, you might want to ask, is it nice to mix CommonJS and ES module in one application? Right. Sometimes you may want to mix CommonJS and ES module in the same project. Here is how you can do that. If you want to import a CommonJS module in an ES module, you can use the import statements like this. So this is how to do that. If I want to import this, I can just say import asterisk, which is all, as math from math.js. So this is how to do this. So if I comment out this, we can go back to our math.add and we can go back to our math.subtract if you want to combine the CommonJS and the ES module in one application. So in summary, to wrap up all we've discussed so far, CommonJS is a traditional module system in Node.js using the required keyword. Don't forget that. And it uses the module.export keyword to expose functions, to expose variables, objects, arrays to other files. ES module is the modern module system in JavaScript. It uses the import keyword alone and uses the export keyword alone. But if before you use the ES module in your application, you need to specify the type property in your package.json. And we also see that both systems have their strength, and knowing both will help you work with different type of Node.js projects. Don't limit yourself to just ES module. Don't limit yourself to just CommonJS module. So if you follow this class to this point, please don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to share. If you have any question, drop in the comment section. If you have any recommendation for us, drop in the comment section and we will respond to you ASAP. In the next video, we're going to look at asynchronous programming in Node.js, and you wouldn't want to miss that. Turn on your notification bell so you get notified when we drop our next video. See you guys then. Bye for now.